Welcome to the newest chapter of Beyond the Next Chapter. I am your host, Whitney Clark, and we are so excited about this episode because we get to talk to one of our favorite authors about her newest book called Expiration Dates. We're diving into the newest from author Rebecca Serle. Now, she's a New York Times bestselling author who also wrote In 5 Years and most recently One Italian Summer. So joining us now is Rebecca. Rebecca, hi. Thanks so much for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's really nice to see you.
So let's talk a little bit about Expiration Dates. When did you start working on the book? How did you come up with this idea?
So I think I started working on the book, or at least I started thinking about the book probably as early as the end of 2020 and maybe the beginning of 2021. Right around the time I finished probably right around the time I finished One Italian Summer. And the way it works with me is I'll come up with a conceit. So in Expiration Dates, it's what if every time you met a man, you would know how long you would spend with that person? And so I'll sort of turn on that and turn on that and turn on that for about a year before I really kind of understand what this book is. I like to say capital A about, and then I start writing. So it's been quite a few years. It will probably be 3 all in by the time folks get to read it. So I'm excited. I'm excited that's finally here.
Kind of like One Italian Summer, your books sort of have a whimsical, sort of magical feel. How is it like for you to write about these topics and write about these kinds of situations, like in this book and also One Italian Summer?
Yeah. So in this book, in Expiration Dates, Daphne, whenever she meets a man, she receives a slip of paper with his name and a number on it. And that number is the exact amount of time that they'll be together. Obviously, not a thing that we all have access to. We're not all receiving slips of paper. In the case of One Italian Summer, we're not all meeting our mothers when our mothers are 30. But for me, the magic is just a little bit of a way. I like to say a way to cut to the quick of what I'm trying to talk about faster and easier. You could tell a story about a young woman who is a serial dater and is looking for love and is going through a lot of men and sort of wondering how her life is going to turn out. But I think it's so interesting to think about, what if we knew, what if we knew how long we had? How might that change the way we interact with the people who come into our lives? How might that change how we see our own romantic journey? And so I think that magic is a way to make the ideas both more direct and also bigger in a sense.
Yeah, totally. How much of these love stories are based off of your own life or friends' lives or, people that you or your friends have also met in their, I guess, dating lives?
Well, I mean, listen, it's no secret that I was single for a long time. I did not meet my husband until I was almost 36. So a lot of the men, I would say, here's what I'll say, and I mean this really seriously, nobody is based off of anybody else. But a lot of the lessons that Daphne has to learn are lessons I had to learn too. So I think a lot of the relationships, the quality of the relationships that she experiences are probably similar to the relationships I did, because there were similar lessons I had to learn. She has her own lessons. They're not all the same, but some of them are overlapping. And so I can recognize maybe the quality of a relationship I've been in when I read those chapters, not necessarily the person.
No name. We won't be naming any names. That's for sure.
Right.
So, to me, as it was the case with One Italian Summer, it almost felt when I read One Italian Summer, I wanted to go to Italy. I mean, that was just end of story. That's where I wanted to go. But this book also made me want to go to Los Angeles, and you wrote about it in such a really detailed way that, again, made me feel like I wanted to go there. It was almost like LA was a character in this book. How important are locations for you and really getting into the details of some of these places and what it's like to live there?
Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I got to go back to the Hotel Poseidon, which is where One Italian Summer takes place last summer. And there were so many people there who were reading the book and who had journeyed there because of the book. And I just it makes me so happy to think of people getting to go on adventures through my novel. So thank you. I started off writing when I lived in New York City. I started off, my novel career when I lived in New York City. And so I think particularly with The Dinner List and In 5 Years, there was such a sense of New York because I was so enamored of that city. I loved it so much. It's where I just felt like my heart and my soul came from, where my writing came from. And so felt very organic and natural for me to write that place in because I loved it so much. And then when I, went to Italy and did One Italian Summer, there really is no way to talk about Italy without delving into the pasta and the salt water. And like, you want to feel it and experience it. Otherwise, why are you setting a book there? And so now it's sort of become a hallmark of what I do. And I will say I've moved back to Los Angeles because I used to live here, and I've been back now for over 5 years. And I fell in love with it in a different way this time. And I think that Daphne's LA has a lot in common with mine. We live in similar locations. And also, like, all the restaurants in the books, or at least the majority of them that I write, are restaurants that at one point, in time existed or still exist. Like, they're all places that you can visit. And there's always like a special edition also book floating around. I'm not exactly sure what market it is that has an itinerary that lists like sort of like Daphne's 36 hours in LA. So I love it. And I'm glad to get to share it with people.
So I want to talk about the book dedication, because it says, "For Jay, finally." Can you tell us the story there, your own story there?
Well, Jay is my husband. I got married last year, and I've said a lot, and I didn't see this coming. I really thought that meeting my person would be like the end of this story, of like my story, of the story of like searching and looking and who's it going to be, and that there would be this like big crescendo and that would be the end. But the truth is that meeting him was just the start of an entirely different story. And not really the story that we're talking about today, right? Like, that's actually like a very different narrative that I'm assuming probably will be a different book. This book is really about what it means to still be looking, and all of the questions that come with being single, particularly being single in your 30s and still wondering, like, what's out there for me, and what do I actually want, and what is it going to look like? And so I was really grateful that I got to write it when I did, like being with him and being married and now sort of moving on to this other phase of my life. You do start to get a little farther away from the immediacy and the intimacy of what it feels like to really be in that state. And I'm just really glad that I put it down to paper while I was still in it, because I wrote this book before I had ever met him.
Oh, wow. And what was it like, sharing this work with him, and, him sort of learning about what you do and kind of the stories that you write?
Well, I mean, listen, going forward, it's a little tricky, right? Because now we're married, and I say to him all the time, I'm like, honey, you know what like really doesn't make for interesting or compelling books? Happy marriages. Like, no one wants to read about a book where two people are just like, we love each other and there are no issues. So I've sort of tried to prime him, I think, more for what comes next than what came before, because now he's in my life, and it's going to be impossible for him not to recognize himself in some of my characters, because that's just how it goes. It doesn't mean that the husband is him in any stretch of the imagination. It doesn't mean that the wife is me. But of course, like, there are elements from my real life because they bleed together. There really is not a big separation of church and state when it comes to my writing.
So I don't want to give too much away if people haven't read the book yet, or maybe they're getting ready to read it. But despite the paper, I found myself rooting for, Daphne and Hugo. I mean, I think most people sort of get that from the beginning. Explain the relationship between those two and how close they were, as friends throughout the novel.
Yeah. So Hugo is Daphne's ex. She got a piece of paper, and she says this pretty early at the front of the book, and it said 3 months, and they spent 3 months together. And then they became friends, and they've been friends for 5 years when the book opens. And I really felt like there was a real pull between the two of them, but I wasn't totally sure exactly what I was trying to say or how it would turn out, I think, until about midway through the book. I didn't know. She's also exploring this relationship with Jake. And there's a lot, I think there's a lot of what I want to say about both what it means to partner and also like who the person is that I was looking for in both of these men. And I mean, I guess you'll have to read to find out. Daphne ultimately sort of made her own decision in the writing process, but I kind of fell in love with both of them as I was writing. I really love Hugo. He's such a specific character. I hadn't really written someone exactly like him before. And then Jake is just, Jake is like in some ways the person that we are all looking for. So
Jake is like the golden retriever boyfriend.
Yeah, but also like I think that, I think one of the things you realize or at least I did, as I got older, is that sometimes those quiet relationships are actually the most meaningful and have the most depth. We just don't recognize them because they come in softly. Like they don't come in with a lot of drama and chaos. They come in sort of more gently. And so it's hard for us to really realize the significance of that until we're in it and it's all encompassing. I think in a lot of ways that's what happened with my husband. It was like a little bit of a slow start in the beginning, and then 4 dates in, I was like, oh, I think you're him. I think we're gonna be married.
Yeah. I think we watch so many movies that show love as being this chaotic, dramatic, and that's not always the case in real life. And so sometimes like separating, real life, what you see in movies. So to see a relationship portrayed like that, I think was really interesting, because I think everyone has a Hugo, and everyone probably has a Jake too in their lives for sure.
Yes, they're very different. Yeah.
I'm looking through some of my notes as I was reading. I was sort of taking pictures of paragraphs that really kind of resonated with me. And one of them is sort of about how friendships change as you get older. And, you have to sort of choose your friends, because a lot of things can kind of not get in the way of that. But people have kids, people get into relationships, and it can be really difficult. I mean, why was that so important for you to touch on that as something that, as myself in my mid-30s, go through as well?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think the female relationships and the women in my life were the primary relationships for so long for me. And I really love to write about friendship. I mean, I wrote a whole book in 5 years that was just about that. It was about like the deep love between women. And my first, adult novel, The Dinner List, also really deals with what it means to be still trying to choose each other while we're on, like you said, such different life paths. Because I think when you're young and you're growing up, and even to extent, like, through our like mid-20s for the most part, you're kind of doing the similar things. Like maybe you're all going to college, or you're all starting working, or you're all like, moving out or moving to another city, and dating, and then things start to kind of splinter a little bit. I think actually, like, the influencer Tinks calls this like the splinter decade or something of your 30s. But like yeah, like some people get married, some people have children, some people, move for their jobs. And I'm really curious and interested in like how we keep choosing each other, and honestly, like how we keep choosing each other when we don't have a lot of time to do it. What it means to not only devote time and energy into friendships, but also what it means to give grace when we don't have either of those things.
I think your 30s can be really transformative in a lot of different ways because of that. And also one thing that's touched on in the book that we won't, give too much away is, health problems, or, encountering sort of issues with possibly health. Why was that sort of an added element, I guess, as well in the book?
Well, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, all of my books really deal with, I don't know, like some kind of sense of mortality, I guess you could say. I mean, not really even just in the physical, but in the awareness of like that our time is limited here in some way, that the people we love's time is limited, that like, that there is a little bit of a ticking clock to our existence, and that it is both sort of like infinite in the things that we can experience, and the way we can feel, and the way we can love, and the way we can grieve. And also just like very, very brief. And so that tends to be, like this dialogue between fate and free will, which is a thing that I really like to talk about. I think like the ideas of mortality are also, they just tend to show up in my books, because these are the things about humanity that I'm preoccupied with in my own life. So I write them to, kind of figure out how I feel, or maybe write through my fears.
I think the older you get, the more you think about those things as well. You either have family members, or you have, people that are close to your own age, that it's like, oh, now all of a sudden we're in our 30s and we're dealing with things that we thought in our 20s would never sort of get here. At least that's sort of been my experience as a 30-something-year-old.
For sure. You start to realize that the ride doesn't go on forever. And I imagine it just gets more and more dramatic as we get older, and your parents get older, and things happen to their friends or them, or, it changes. I think when you're in your 20s, you feel like you're sort of invincible, that you're going to live forever. And then as you get older, you start to realize that nobody does.
Yeah. What do you hope people take away from Daphne's story?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I really hope that it speaks to women who are still in the search, whatever that means for you. I certainly don't think that everybody is looking for their soulmate or should be. Um, but I hope it makes people who are searching feel less alone. And I don't know, like I think ultimately the message, like all of my books, I like to say that I'm not a fan of finished endings, but I do like a happy one. So it's always open because there's more life to lead. You know, like I said, meeting my husband was really not the close of the story, but the start of a different one. So there's always an and if we're lucky. And yeah, I mean, I hope I can just meet you in the middle if you're out there and wondering what's coming next for you.
And this did sort of end open-ended. Like I felt like the story could continue, obviously, as was the case, you know, with you and your husband. It's always an open end. Do you see Daphne's story possibly continuing in any other novels or in any other way?
I don't think so. I've never written a sequel before. I don't really, I mean, like, never say never, right? Like, who knows? Life is long, God willing, careers are too. But I don't really see a sequel for any of my books. I like to say, you know, when a book is published, it belongs to you just as much as it belongs to me. I don't have the answers anymore. And I like that. I like that everyone can kind of decide for themselves what comes next.
So I love to ask the authors that we talk to, the authors they enjoy, the books that they've enjoyed lately. Do you have any authors that you really sort of look up to or admire, or any books that have been your favorites as of late?
Yes, I mean, lots. Okay, what have I read as of late that I really love? I will say I love Kevin Wilson's books. I just finished Now Is Not the Time to Panic. It was so brilliant. I love Nothing to See Here as well. Like, I just think what he does with magical realism is so quirky and specific and interesting. I read Dolly Alderton's Good Material. I loved it. I thought it was such an interesting exploration of the anatomy of a breakup, and particularly a breakup in your 30s. Yeah, I just thought it was brilliant. My favorite book of all time is The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. by Adele Waldman. I talk about it constantly. She has a new book coming out, so I'm really excited to read that. I love, love, love her work. And I'm starting Shark Heart, and I'm so sorry I'm blanking on who the author is. I have a book club.
Oh,
One
cool.
of the best things I did in 2023 is I started a book club, and we're reading Shark Heart this month. I haven't started it yet because I've been a little behind with my own work, but I'm excited to dive into that too.
Cool. So I have been a member of a couple book clubs that always end up failing. It's like we get together once or twice, and then either people aren't available or they can't read the book or they didn't read a book. Do you have any advice for people who might want to start a book club or interested in joining one?
I have so many. I have so many pieces of advice. And the number one thing is you have to be militant. Like, my book club is terrified of me. Like, they're terrified of not showing up. They are like, if any of my book club is listening, they would all be like, yeah, it's true. We never move the date. So it's like, it's the second Monday of every single month, and who's in town comes and who's not in town doesn't. We never move the date. It's always at the same time. We circle through hosts. So, you know, different person like hosts a different month, and the person who's hosting chooses like 3 books for the book club to vote on the month before. We're very rule oriented. Like, I'm going to tell you, you can't have a book club where you're like, let's read books and drink some wine. It's going to fall apart. It's not going to happen. Yeah. You have to have like a militant rules for how the book club operates. And it's like, if you would like to be in it, that's what you're signing up for. But we end up meeting every single month, and we read a book every single month. And so you got to be stringent.
I love it. And I think the voting is what makes the most sense, because we made the mistake of one person just picking. No. I think it has to be a voting situation. It has to be a voting,
but it has to be limited. So like 3 books, we vote on them, we read, that's it. And you know what? Like, don't be afraid of the books that we all hate, which by the way is a lot of them. We've read some stinkers last year. They end up being the most fun book club discussions. Like, it's interesting, and it's interesting when you have different points of view on stuff. And the other thing is, like, I didn't want it to be all authors, because I have a lot of author friends, obviously. Like, it's a mix of different people, and I think that's important too. So yeah. And we have 3 men in our book club, which apparently is unheard of. Nobody has men in
Oh.
their book club. So we feel very proud of that.
Wow. I also
I
never
know.
have had, I've never, I mean, one of the book clubs I was in was specifically romance books.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have gone so well, but
Yeah.
that would bring an interesting, perspective for the table.
Totally. 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 And,
Okay.
men have more free time because they're not, carrying the burden of 7,000 things that we are. So they tend to show up too.
Less tabs in the mind open than
Yeah.
we women have a
Yeah.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about Daphne, and you had that, sort of the itinerary of what you can do in LA. Do you have any recommendations for folks if they read this and they think, oh my gosh, I want to go spend some time in LA? What would be your favorite places that you would recommend for folks?
Oh my God, yes, I have tons. Let's see. I mean, there are a million places to stay. It's kind of fun to stay down by the beach. I love the Bel Air Hotel is just my favorite spot in Los Angeles. It's insanely expensive to stay, but you should go and get drinks there. They have like the best little outdoor terrace for cocktails, and it's my favorite. The food there is great too. I love Tower Bar. I love Beverly Hills Juice. The best coffee, in my opinion, is Kings Road Cafe on Beverly. So there'll be an itinerary up on my website as well for folks who want to check it out.
Okay, we love it. And I do love to ask this question to most of the people we talk to as well. What advice do you have for women who maybe, whether it's getting into writing or getting into something new in their lives, maybe they're contemplating a relationship? What advice would you have for them?
Stay present. Stay present, one foot in front of the other. I think when it comes to writing, it's so important to just do it. And I know that that sounds really rudimentary and obvious, but to be honest, it's kind of the whole of it. I started running recently and I like won't shut up about it, but I never ran before. I was always afraid of it. My knees always hurt. And I was like, I would really like to start. So I like, have a coach and we've been doing it. And I realize how much running and writing have in common. And the reality is that all you have to do is just like get out there and start moving. Like just start moving. Whatever it is, just begin. And so if it's writing, set yourself a really manageable goal. Just go out and do 500 words a day or 500 steps, or, maybe like you decide that you're going to reach out to one person on a dating app once a week, but just start moving. Just start moving. A friend of mine once said to me that like it takes a long time to change, but the time is going to pass anyway. So begin.
Mm.
And so I guess that would be my advice. Begin.
I love it. Just keep moving, no matter what it is. You have to start somewhere. So Expiration Dates is out now. I know maybe this is too soon to talk about it, but when will you start even thinking about the next project? Do you already have some ideas in mind?
I do. Yes. I have some ideas in mind. Yes. I'm working on something, but it's all about expiration dates right now. So we probably won't talk about that until next year, but I am working on something.
Okay, great. Well, we would love to have you back. Anything else you want people to know about Expiration Dates or any of your other novels so far?
No, I'm just so excited to get to chat about it to people. I feel really grateful that my readers have been here now with me. This is my 4th book for adults, and Through Dinnerless and In 5 Years and One Italian Summer. And I'm honestly just excited to talk about romantic love. I'm excited to talk about people's stories. Like, I think it's going to be a really, really fun book tour. I'm like out on the road now and will continue to be for the next few weeks. And so if you are in any of the stops that I'm coming to, please come out. We're going to do like a fun girls' night out book tour vibes. And I would love to see you and sign a coffee. So go on out. And all of the information for book tour, for extra resources, for your book club is on Instagram and on my website, RebeccaSerle.com. You can find everything you need there.
Okay. And this is perfect for a book club. A girls' night book club, Expiration Dates is the one, is certainly the one. So Rebecca, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.